Hello and welcome to the Biological Anthropology lecture series. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tadurin. Here we explore what it means to be human, biologically, evolutionarily, and behaviorally. Let's begin our journey into the science of humanity. Welcome to Module 6, Primate and Anthropoid Evolution. Here, we trace the origins and diversification of early primates, anthropoids, and Miocene apes. In this module, we're stepping into deep time to follow a story that began more than 60 million years ago, long before humans, long before the great apes, back when the world itself looked very different. In this section, we examine the Miocene apes and the evolutionary split between hominoids and cercopithecoids. Let's revisit where the story of the Miocene apes begins. As we enter the early Miocene, around 23 million years ago, Africa was home to a diverse group of primates that were neither quite monkey nor fully ape in the way we think of apes today. These are the Proconsulids. When you hear the name proconsul, think of an early hominoid experimenting with new anatomical possibilities at a time when forests were shifting and ecological niches were opening. You might wonder why these animals get so much attention. It's because they capture a moment when the primate lineage was poised for major evolutionary change. Let's look at their anatomy. Proconsulids lacked a tail, a key trait that aligns them with apes, but their bodies still retained many monkey-like features. They moved primarily as arboreal quadrupeds, meaning they walked along branches rather than suspending beneath them like later apes would. They didn't yet show the full suite of adaptations for brachiation or hanging, but their shoulders, spine, and hands were beginning to shift in ways that hint at later hominoid locomotion. Think about this as a transitional phase, where evolution is adjusting the blueprint but hasn't finalized the design. Their teeth provide another window into their lives. Proconsulids typically had Y5 molars, a hallmark of hominoids, and their dental anatomy suggests diets ranging from fruit to tougher vegetation depending on the species. This dietary flexibility may help explain why they were able to diversify into multiple genera and species, at least 10 genera and 15 species, according to the fossil record. When you consider how different Miocene habitats were across Africa, it makes sense that a flexible eater with an adaptable body plan could thrive. You might wonder what their social lives were like. While fossils can't give us full behavioral reconstructions, comparisons with modern primates suggest that proconsulids may have lived in groups and occupied complex forest environments. Their limb proportions and joint structures indicate animals capable of controlled, deliberate movement across branches, suggesting careful negotiation of arboreal spaces rather than dramatic leaps or suspensory swings. Here's the key point to hold on to. Proconsulids represent an early stage in ape evolution before the dramatic specialization seen in later Miocene hominoids. They are not direct ancestors of any single modern ape species, but they lie somewhere near the base of the hominoid radiation. They show us what the earliest apes may have looked like before apes spread into Europe and Asia and diversified into forms like Dryopithecus and Civipithecus. So as we move forward, think of proconsulids as foundational. They occupy a crucial evolutionary space, close enough to earlier anthropoids to retain some ancestral characteristics, but innovative enough to set the stage for the great ape lineages that follow. Their story reminds us that evolution often works through gradual, layered shifts, not sudden leaps, and that the path to the apes we recognize today began with these early Miocene pioneers. Let's revisit where the proconsulids left us. By the middle Miocene, around 16 to 11 million years ago, the world of primates was changing rapidly. Forests were shifting, continents were drifting into positions closer to what we see today, and primates were taking advantage of newly emerging habitats. This is the moment when the hominoids, the broader group that includes all apes, began to diversify in remarkable ways. You might wonder why this period produced so many different ape forms. The answer lies in the combination of ecological opportunity and evolutionary experimentation. With forests stretching across Africa, Europe, and Asia, apes had the space to explore new diets, new ways of moving, and new body plans. Let's look at the Dryopithecids first, a group that flourished primarily in Europe. These apes show clear adaptations for suspensory locomotion, behaviors that involve hanging or swinging beneath branches rather than walking on top of them like earlier apes did. Their long arms, flexible shoulders, and highly mobile joints hint at a lifestyle more reminiscent of modern great apes. Dryopithecids also show evidence of a fruit-rich diet, which may have supported larger brains and more complex behaviors. Fossils from genera like Dryopithecus and Ornopithecus bring us closer to the body proportions and feeding strategies we see in today's hominoids. As we move eastward into Asia, the picture shifts. The Civapithecids, best known from Civapithecus, display a different evolutionary pathway. Think about this. Their skulls share striking similarities with modern orangutans, particularly in the shape of the face and the arrangement of the orbits. Yet their postcranial anatomy doesn't fully match an orangutan-like suspensory lifestyle. This reminds us that evolution doesn't work like a perfect blueprint. It assembles traits and combinations that may not match any living form. You might also recall Gigantopithecus, part of this Asian radiation, which stands out as the largest primate ever known. Its massive jaws and thick enamel suggest a diet of tough, fibrous vegetation, showing how ecological pressures could push hominoids toward very different feeding strategies. Now let's look at a more unusual case, the Oreopithecids of Europe. Oreopithecus lived in what was essentially an island environment, and island life often produces odd evolutionary outcomes. This ape shows a mix of traits, some that resemble suspensory locomotion and others that seem adapted for a very specific feeding niche. Its anatomy doesn't align neatly with the pathways leading to later apes, which is why it's considered an evolutionary side branch rather than a direct ancestor of modern groups. But its existence highlights the flexibility and diversity of hominoid evolution during this period. You might be wondering what unites all these different apes from Europe, Asia, and Africa. The key is that the Middle and Late Miocene were times of widespread hominoid experimentation. As climates shifted and forests changed, apes were under pressure to adapt. Some evolved specialized diets. Others developed new locomotor adaptations. Some thrived for millions of years before disappearing, while others contributed traits that would eventually appear in modern lineages. As the Miocene progressed and climates cooled toward its end, forests contracted, especially in Europe. This had major consequences. Many hominoid species declined or went extinct, while others migrated or adapted to new conditions. Meanwhile, monkeys, particularly the Cercopithecoids, began to flourish, setting up the ecological balance we see today, where monkeys are far more numerous and diverse than apes. So as we close this section, think of the Middle to Late Miocene as a grand stage of evolutionary creativity. Apes explored a wide array of forms and lifestyles, pushing the boundaries of what primate bodies could do. Their successes and failures shaped the possibilities available to later primates, including the ancestors of modern great apes and, much later, the human lineage. Let's revisit the environmental backdrop of the Late Miocene. As we move toward the end of this epoch, global climates began to cool, and this cooling had profound consequences for primate evolution. Forests that once stretched widely across Africa, Europe, and Asia began to fragment. Grasslands expanded. Seasonal climates intensified. You might wonder why this matters for understanding primate history, but these shifts dramatically reshaped the habitats available to both apes and monkeys. While many hominoids struggled to adapt to these changing environments, Cercopithecoids, the Old World monkeys, began to flourish. Monkeys possessed traits that made them remarkably adaptable. More generalized diets, efficient bilophodont molars for processing tough vegetation, and body plans that worked well in both trees and more open habitats. As forests contracted, monkeys were able to exploit new ecological niches, that apes, with their more specialized locomotor and dietary adaptations, often could not. Think about Victoriopithecus, one of the earliest well-known cercopithicoids. Its combination of monkey-like postcranial features and complex molar structure hints at a lineage well-suited to the shifting ecosystems of the late Miocene. Later forms, like Therapithecus oswaldi, show how monkeys diversified even further, adapting to increasingly open and arid landscapes. You might be asking, what does this mean for the long-term trajectory of primates? Quite simply, the late Miocene marks the point when monkeys began their rise to ecological dominance. While many ape species dwindled or went extinct as habitats changed, cercopithicoids expanded in both number and range. This shift set the stage for the primate communities we see today, where monkeys far outnumber apes across much of the Old World. So as we wrap up this section, remember that climatic change didn't just influence primate evolution, it fundamentally restructured it, shaping which lineages thrived and which ones faded away. Let's revisit the journey we traced through the Miocene. We began with the Proconsulids, early apes navigating changing forests with bodies that were part ancestral blueprint, part evolutionary experiment. Then we followed hominoids as they spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia, exploring new diets and new ways of moving. You might wonder why this burst of diversity didn't last. The answer lies in the dramatic climatic shifts that reshaped the late Miocene world, transforming dense forests into patchier, more seasonal environments. These environmental changes didn't affect all primates in the same way. Many apes, with their specialized locomotor strategies and dietary needs, struggled as their habitats contracted. But monkeys, particularly the cercopithicoids, began to thrive. Their flexible diets, efficient teeth, and adaptable body plans allowed them to move into new ecological spaces. Let's look at the big picture here. The rise of monkeys during the late Miocene marks a turning point where primate diversity began to tilt toward the cercopithicoids, a pattern that still defines the Old World primate communities we see today. As we close this section, think about how evolution during the Miocene wasn't just a story of new forms emerging, it was also a story of competition, climate, and survival. The successes and declines of these ancient apes and monkeys shaped the evolutionary landscape that made later hominoids, and eventually humans, possible. First, let's revisit the arc of the story we explored in this module. We began with the origins of primates in the Paleocene and Eocene, where shifting climates and expanding forests created the perfect backdrop for early euprimates to flourish. From their grasping hands to their enhanced vision, we saw how these early adaptations laid the groundwork for everything that followed. You might wonder why these small-bodied ancestors matter so much, but as we moved into the rise of anthropoids, their significance became clear. They provided the anatomical and ecological foundations upon which monkeys, apes, and eventually humans would evolve. Now, this part is important. Anthropoid diversification was not a neat, linear process. As we looked at Eosimius, the Phaeum primates, and the first catarrhines, we watched evolution unfold as a series of branching experiments shaped by climate, geography, and opportunity. Each lineage carried forward different combinations of traits, creating the mosaic that defines primate evolution. Then we stepped into the Miocene, a period of extraordinary hominoid diversity, from Proconsulids to Dryopithecids and Civipithecids, followed by the dramatic environmental shifts that paved the way for monkey radiation. Let's look at the broader lesson here. Evolution is responsive. As climates cooled and forests contracted, some lineages declined while others thrived, and these ecological dynamics shaped the primate world we see today. As we move into the next module, keep this branching, adaptive, ever-changing evolutionary landscape in mind. It sets the stage for understanding the emergence of our own lineage. Thank you for joining this lecture. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tadurin. I hope this session deepened your understanding of biological anthropology. Keep exploring what it means to be human. See you soon.